right, God, thank you very much for members of the public, members of the Board of Education here for joining us for a committee of the whole to talk about the general fund budget here on Monday, April 12th at 6:05. So we'll get started here. Present here in person is Mrs. Kim Spath, Mrs. Lauren McCurdy, Mr. Jim Brogna, Mr. Barry Boone, and Mr. Jimmy Costello. On a Zoom call, we have Mr. Bob Mahalik, the Superintendent of Schools, as well as Mrs. Maureen McGovern, as well as Mrs. Stacy Haddix, and Mr. Randy Swank. So we have the entire board, and it's rep. Yes, sir.
Adjust the camera a little bit so the board can just see the room. Can you just bring it down a little bit?
Could you bring the camera down, John, so the board can see the room a little bit?
Yep, no problem. Hang on just a moment.
All you do is the screen. Just tilt the screen down.
Okay, got it.
Is that okay, John? Is that okay, Mr. Mahalik?
No,
Tilt the screen down a little bit, he said.
just tilt the screen down.
Oh, is he talking about the laptop?
Are you talking about the laptop?
Just the laptop.
This
Okay.
one like this?
Bring it down.
Oh, this one like this, okay. Like that?
That's all you gotta do.
Okay. All right, there you go. Okay. So currently we have the entire Board of Education present. Members of the public, I thank you for joining us. And so right now we'll start by talking about what we're going to be talking about in this budget meeting, the year-to-year comparisons and discussion on each line item, COVID and ESSER federal and state funds that we have received and money that is still yet to come, the fund balance discussions, and the financial capacity of the Crestwood School District and why it is important, and some of the things that we have talked about in the past. I've talked about it several times, but we'll continue the discussion on those pieces. So let's talk about the year-to-year, year-to-year comparisons. I showed you this in the previous budget meeting a couple of years ago, or a couple of months ago, or weeks ago, and I didn't really show you what went up and what went down from year to year. So we're going to talk about some of the pieces here. If you look at some of the pieces here, the local source revenue, I'm sorry if I'm blocking anybody's, okay. If you look at the local sources, it went up 4.66% from last year to this year, or from this year, or from the current budget to the one that's projected or proposed. That is in turn mostly because of the 3.7% tax increase that's proposed, but also because I increased the real estate transfer taxes. Over the last 2 years, we've had a dramatic increase in real estate purchases in the area. So I increased the revenue to match that because we have to show we have to show to the taxpayers that we are incurring more money, so we have to put some more money in there. The other amounts here, we kept flat because the state has not told us anything about federal or state funding. Relatively speaking, they did propose a dramatic increase in state funding, but the budget has kind of stayed where it's been at, and there hasn't been any talk about whether or not they're going to increase the funding or not. So I've kept it level. Now there are increases in it. That's for our reimbursement for retirement and Social Security. So for the reimbursements down here, that's why that went up a little bit. We do receive a little bit more money in Title I, so that's why that's up 0.5%. And overall, 3.14% overall because of the COVID-19 expenditures there. So that's for just basically the revenue piece of what the school district brings in. So as you can see, you do bring in a little bit more money because of, like, the COVID-19. This is the ESSER 2 money here. So that's really just the ESSER 2 money that's coming in there that I'm counting as a new revenue line in the 9,000s. It will not be booked in the 9,000s, but I put it there so it stands out a little bit. So we'll talk about in the personnel services, salaries and benefits. These two increases are contractually obligated salaries. Now the one caveat there is that our teachers union is not under contract. So there are no teachers increases in these numbers. So if the teachers union and the board come to an agreement, those numbers will have to be adjusted at a later time. Hopefully, the board and the teachers will come to an agreement before the budget is enacted so that we can adjust those numbers, especially the 100s. Now, the 200s do include, healthcare increases. So the healthcare increases are in that budget number for next year. So that is inclusive of if there's no changes in the way we conduct our health insurance through the district next year. So if there's no changes, they are inclusive of those. So we have to be mindful of those two numbers that could change. Also, they're not inclusive of any changes in hiring if we hire a new HR person or a new director of safety and security, which the board may act on Thursday. Also, I have to update them as well for some salary discrepancies that I noticed when I was doing the budget, the budget preparation document that we were using, plus some other technicalities in there. So those numbers will change for the May 3rd meeting. I just wanted to give you some caveats there, but they're not gonna, the seesaw numbers will not go up that much, maybe a percentage point here or there. It also depends on the teachers' negotiation. The big number here I want to point out is in 500s. There was a dramatic increase from the last time I presented this. I reviewed the transportation contract, and in my error, I didn't put the extra $250,000 that our transportation goes up next year. So that's why this number is 5.72% increased, and that's why I highlighted it there, so you guys understood why it went up, why it jumped. So if there's any questions as to why that went up so much from the last meeting, excuse me, that's why. Basically stayed flat here. I carry these over from the 400s. They're basically property purchase services are things that we buy for maintaining our property and maintaining our equipment. The 300s are things that we buy, such as, or things that we use for tuition reimbursement, stuff like that. The 500s are also, we also put our 500s insurances, so our property and liability insurances. So even though it goes up, that number is up, there may be some offsets coming if we save some money on insurances, which we are studying now, that the product is going out for renewals as we speak. So there may be some savings there. One area that we did save a lot of money on year over year is the -8.5% or -8.75% we saved in supplies. Now, we don't have all the department head budgets in yet, so it's another reason why this budget is still very tentative. But right now, we were able to save 8.75%. Most of that in maintenance over the energy savings plan, that Siemens project that we put in. That is the rest of the Siemens energy savings project that we put in, as well as savings over year savings from some of the COVID money we're using for purchasing cleaning supplies and disinfectants that we're going to use, that we would normally use regular general fund money. We're using the grant money to purchase for. And then the big one is the debt service payment. That goes up 400% because of the, it goes to $2.38 million. Some of it was supposed to be 2.4, but we saved a little bit from the debt refinancing. And then you can see the total expenditures down at the bottom. I do want to point out one thing as well, is that, as you notice, there is still a deficit. It's still $43 million, almost $44 million to $42.2 million. So there's still a deficit. So there's still a structural deficiency in the budget, primarily to do with the debt service. But remember, the debt service will drop to $1.6 million next year. So that deficit, but also the grant, the $9,000 will go away too. So the net equal will be, the budget will structurally balance itself again, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that when the financial capacity of the school district has to continue to be increased, and the only way you can really do that is by raising taxes and raising the millage rate to do that. Unfortunately, that's the only way, because the state and the federal government aren't going to do it for you. So the only way you guys can do it is by two ways: finding new revenue streams or by raising taxes. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, because there are more than one way to do it. We could be a little creative, but the creative way, there's a lot of legal hoops to get through. One of the ways I was thinking of, because of some other ways to do it. I don't even know if it's possible one way, but there's some other ways I was trying to think of instead of raising property taxes, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So here's some of the updates to the budget that's pending. I basically talked about most of these. We still haven't gotten to the departmental budgets or the potential cost savings in the departments and overall spend. I gave them more time to do their budgets this year than last year in an effort to have them save some money on their own. They do an excellent job at saving and cutting corners, and they've done a great job at doing so. So I've given them some extra time to get their budgets done, so hopefully that will help. Hopefully we can also do, hopefully people will continue to buy houses like crazy in the mountaintop area, because that will continue to drive in more revenue to the school district, even more than what the budget will show. I'm looking at increasing even further the real estate transfer tax revenue, depending upon how the rest of this year goes. So let's talk about the COVID grants. These are a list of the grants that we have received so far, and this is probably all the grants we've going to receive this year. So there are a mixture of federal and state grants. The PCCD grants are the two state related grants, actually three of them. The special education COVID mitigation grant's a state grant as well. So there's three grants here that are state grants, the other three are purely federal grants. The ESSER 1 grant was for $221,784. The continuity of ed was $81,469. The COVID-19 school health grant was $229,319. The special education COVID-19 mitigation grant was $16,355. The ESSER 2 is $1,461,088. And the latest one came out with the one that was just signed that came out is the America Recovery Plan, or ESSER 3 they call it, or it might be called ESSER. I call it ESSER 3, $2,910,130 for a total of $4,920,145. The big caveat is we do not receive this money as lump sum payments. They're paid over equal payments over months and years. The government doesn't send us a check for all this money all at once. We file quarterly reports, and if we have a cash need, they send us extra money. If we don't have a cash need, they suspend our payments. And a cash need would be when we submit the grant application for one of these grants. If we did not spend the money that they've already given us, they suspend the payments until we do, then they restart the payments. The only checks that we have received in full were these two up here, the continuity of education and the COVID-19 school health. They're the two checks that we've received that they did send in full. So that's the only two checks that we've actually have in full. The ESSER 1 is still an equal payment.
Excuse me, Pete?
Yes.
Mrs. McGovern just asked if you can move the next page. They're not seeing what you're seeing, just so you know.
How come the page didn't change on here? I wonder how come it didn't change on here.
Sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. How come it didn't change on here? Jonathan, how come it didn't change on here?
I'm not sure.
No, I'm on a different page. I'm on the COVID grants page.
Let's see.
This one here,
Who's presenting?
No, I'm on the COVID grants page.
this page,
No, the COVID's grant page, Bob.
they all say COVID grants.
No, the first one where all the totals are on it.
Yeah, I just asked you that. It's this one right here.
No, that's the year-to-year comparison I'm seeing.
Oh, I'm not on ours. On ours, where's, look at my screen share.
I am. It says year-to-year comparison. Make me the host, Bob. John.
Yeah, can you email it to me real quick?
I did. I emailed it to you to put on the website.
Oh, okay.
Jonathan's gonna put it on the screen for you guys. Hang on a second.
Mr. Mahal, Well, I think it's slide 5 is the correct one that
Did they
everybody's seeing through the
officially
live
say
stream.
that we said 20% has to be used on remediation yet?
That's what I have on the
20% was what they were going with, but I don't know if they officially approved that. We were waiting for some legal counsel in the state. That's the 20% I keep hearing too, which is
I was actually looking at some of the
582,000. But we have to somehow implement
infrastructure,
into
boilers,
direct.
air ventilation.
You try to turn on, make sure that we start.
Shut off the
Or
screen
we-
share,
we're
Bob,
not
when we
getting
start.
told,
You know
or
what I
we
mean?
lose immediately.
That's a tight spend when you get that much more. But
Yeah.
when you're down to this amount, it's like, just tell us the things we can't spend.
And see, that's what we don't think it can. So when at the IU, we were talking about that. You're saying it has to be
No, we're still seeing,
tracing on two,
I used to know
student.
What's
Like
like
a summer school program.
So there we are, there you go, now you do it.
We pay their bill. So we don't know yet.
Okay, there you go, you're
So I
perfect,
should get an
Bob.
update on it to find out.
All right, guys, sorry about
Those are the
that.
questions we were asking, because we use it for other meetings.
So
They don't know yet.
I will go to, so I'll restart and start with the, how we spent these funds that we have received so far. So, Bob, we're on the spending of the COVID money, so we're on the next slide now. Yeah, there's that one. The COVID grants on ESSER one, we spent the 221,784 on the following items you see on the screen. 103,940 we purchased Promethean boards for Rice and Fairview Elementary Schools, about 50 of them. 24,000 will be used for the new esports program that we started to engage a new group of students. 50,000 is going to be spent on the summer remedial program that you guys heard about on Thursday night. That'll be used for K through 8. 15 was part of our non-public share, so that went to St. Jude's to purchase supplies. That's a requirement under the grant, that a portion or percentage of it goes to our non-pub. 41,029 went to miscellaneous PPE and cleaning supplies for our maintenance department and our students' health and safety. And that totaled 221,784. So that is where the first ESSER 1 money has been allocated or has been spent. Now, obviously, some of this money has not been spent yet because the 24,000 and the 50,000 has not been fully executed and spent yet. So some of this money is still to be spent, but that's where the money has been allocated or has been spent. So that's for the ESSER 1 money. For for the continuity of education, for the PCCD grant, the 81,469. That was one of the first grants that we received when we shut down in March of 2020. We purchased 320 Chromebooks with that money for our online learning. So that's where all that money went to, specifically that purpose. The second grant, the COVID-19 School Health, or PCCD grant, was $229,319. And with that money, we purchased our online platform, Admentum, for $111,169.64. We purchased another set of Chromebooks, 401 Chromebooks, for $107,776.36. And we purchased frontline absence systems to better assist with our, to manage our absentee system with our professional staff, to total $229,319. So that is with that, we spent with that set of funds. And that money has been allocated and spent, as well as the continuity of education money. We did receive both of those money and have expended both of those money. The special education COVID-19 mitigation grant, we received $16,355. We have received those funds in totality. There's $10,000 allocated for supplies, books, and technology for special education students, as well as $6,355 for training and support for the staff, so that when we did receive the supplies and technology, that the staff could be trained on them, for the total of that $16,355. So now we get to the ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3 money. The grant guidelines for ESSER 2 are such that it can be spent on maintaining programs and staff, which is what we're currently looking to spend these funds on for 21-22. The plans are fluid and they can be changed for the best judgment for when we're using these funds, I currently have left them in as a line item in the revenue part of the budget. The ESSER 3 money I didn't do anything with yet because there are things that are so fluid with this that we really don't have much guidance to go on besides bullet point number 1, which is that 20% of these funds must be used for recovery of COVID, recovery, academic recovery of our students, or for COVID-related expenditures like ESSER 1, and then the rest of the money can be used like ESSER 2, which would be $2,328,104, and the funds must be used by September of 2024. But for ESSER 2, basically what, and some people have heard this talk before, but some of the pieces of like ESSER 1 or ESSER 2 hasn't been explained to me is that if the Board of Education came and said in a previous year under COVID they wanted to raise taxes, for example, to say, like if you remember correctly, I was presenting a budget presentation before we shut down at COVID of a potential 4.8% increase because we needed the funds to begin to prepare for the big debt service payment. Well, the board then, COVID hit, and then the plans changed because of the community base. We didn't want to, the board did not want to hamstring the community with a large tax increase. Well, the government came in, the federal government said, we're going to help you replace that money that the board did not want to raise taxes on. This is the money that they're giving the communities to help fill the gaps in between that, to help stabilize the school districts so that they don't have to cut programs, staff, or anything, or cut any type of needs that they may have. So the same thing with the American Recovery Plan, but the thing of it is that we don't have much guidance on the rest of the American Recovery Plan because, quite frankly, they're still developing it. But my understanding is it's going to be the same as ESSER 2. We can use that to fill in the gaps as we need to in the school district to fulfill what we need to fulfill within staff, students, and make sure that we don't have to cut anything or anything of that nature. Now, remember, these are historic measures, but also remember that these funds will go away. So as soon as these monies go away, the physical constraints will remain thereafter. There's no such thing as a one-time purchase. So we bought 701 Chromebooks, 50 Promethean boards. We had a donation that bought another $50,000 worth of Chromebooks as well. So these Chromebooks have to be replaced at some point as well down the future. I know some of the recovery plan money we can potentially go to one-to-one Chromebook-wise throughout the school district. We could fix some of our technological needs. We could do some other things with the money, but at some point we're going to have to replace all the technological needs that we have. So before we do anything, we have to make sure we have a plan to replace them in 5, 6, 7, 8 years, because we're never going to have a time where we're given 1.4 million or 2.9 million again. So we have to have a plan to replace them in that time period within the constructs of our general fund budget. And that's where we get to our fund balance discussion. So our current fund balance is 1.3 million. Now when we refinanced our debt, I had to go through another rating call. In addition, I had to go through another rating call, but I went through it. And the one point that our rating call guideline, our guidance went through was that the state guidelines for our district is pretty clear that they used. And it said that our district the fund balance should be between 8 and 10% of our expenditures. So our expenditures are 42 million. So 8 to 10% should be 3.36 million, which is 4.2 million. So that should be where we are. So we are well below that now. So our district is technically financially stressed because we don't have that money in a fund balance. What that does for us is, we have to take a tax revenue anticipation note, which I will present to the board in May and June, so that we have cash to make payroll, pay our bills, operate the school district until the subsidy payments start coming in September, and that we will incur some interest stress, about $10,000, somewhere around there. The interest rates are low. But it doesn't, if we had the fund balance, we wouldn't have to do that because we'd have that money sitting in our savings account or our fund balance. We wouldn't have to do that. But there are 3 ways that we can increase our fund balance. Number one is increase our financial capacity. So how do we increase our financial capacity? Number one is the easy way, which is I come to you every year and ask you to raise taxes. I mean, that's the easy way out. Number two, that's the hardest way to do it, is decrease expenditures, especially in the school district where the board has done a phenomenal job over the last 10 years of decreasing expenditures for the most part. And the three is combination of both. A lot of times we just do number two. You know, number two is just decreasing expenditures. Nobody wants to do number one, especially, you know, every 2 years when it's an election year, nobody wants to do number one because nobody wants to raise taxes. So, no, that's really, people look at the financial capacity piece and say, oh, we're only going to raise taxes. There are other ways to do it than just raising taxes. But we still have to continue to stabilize the district no matter what ESSER money we have coming in. Because what happened, if you remember correctly, in the 2010s, 2011, 2012, when the last batch of stimulus money came in, the school districts stopped raising taxes and they just took the money that the government gave them, balanced their budget on that, and then they started sliding back down to the point where we are at right now. But the fund balances were much higher back then. So it was easier to say to do that when your fund balance was 8, 9, 10 million. You know, if your expenditures were 39 million or 38 million back then, if as a board member, I wouldn't have raised taxes either. If some, you know, big business manager was standing in front of me saying, you gotta raise taxes, I'd say, what are you talking about? We have $10 million in the bank, we don't need to. But it's a little bit different now. So so basically what I just talked about was the consequences of not having a fund balance would be higher interest rates in the bond market. Now, when we were downgraded, we received a 25% or 0.25%, excuse me, increase in our bonds in the one that we refinanced. Now, when you guys saw the proposal, that was already priced in. So Michael Vind and Brian Kozlowski already had that figured out. So the savings were not impacted. So when you guys saw the savings, that was already figured into it. Because they figured that was going to happen. The need to get a TRAN every year, paying the 10 to 20 grand in interest on the loan when we draw it. Normally, I ask you for usually between $4 and $4.5 million. I usually only draw about $2.5 million to get us through, which is the bare minimum we need to pay our bills and get through until the tax revenue starts coming in September. And there's no financial flexibility to do anything. It's really just the bare necessities and the bare bones for the district. And we've operated like that with good, you know, we've operated like that for many years, and that's good. This district has done a great job, and the administration has done a great job at doing that. But it's not saying that we have a fund balance, we're going to start buying Cadillacs for our maintenance staff or Cadillac trucks for our maintenance staff. It's just that there's a lot of things that we need updates on. There's our fleet of trucks is falling apart. There's some capital projects that need to be done, which I think I talk about in some of these in the next slide here. So the financial capacity piece. There's more than just raising taxes, okay? So the revenue streams that we can do is the medical access billing. Bob has led the charge on this from the beginning. I've known Bob for 15 years, and he has always talked about this as being the one piece that no school districts really do, and this is where the money can really be had for districts, and he's absolutely right. I'm completely convinced no business managers, when I talk about a business managers don't believe me, but I'm completely convinced that that's really a piece where money can be really made. So you can get money in and help your students that have special needs out by doing the medical access billing piece. The new grants, there's grant money out there, you just have to look for it, you have to be aggressive, and you have to be active in the grant market, and you have to write grants. You have to stay on top of it even if you're denied. For example, the one grant that we got 40 grand for, we were denied 4 different times, and I appealed it 4 different times, and we got approved on the 5th time. So you have to stay active on it. The previous administration was denied 1 time, and they gave up. Now that's normally what happens, but if you stay active on it, you have a chance to get yes eventually. So that's a good way to bring in streams and to pay for things that your general fund doesn't have to pay for then. Tax increases to the Act 1 index in over years. That is something that PASBO has always talked about business managers and school districts have to do. because they have shown studies over years where school districts meet financial ruins over years when they don't raise to the Act 1 index over years. This doesn't happen overnight, it happens over years. So we don't have to go over the index, it just goes to whatever the state's Act 1 index is, and it's based on, the Act 1 index is based on financial growth of the state, wage growth, job growth, and unemployment, the unemployment factor. So we have about 2 good years left of the Act 1 index being a little bit higher, and then because of COVID, it's probably going to take a dip. So we have to continue to build that financial capacity. But this one, I think, is something that we are partners with the Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber of Commerce, and I never heard anybody talk about it. So it's something that I worked very hard in Weatherly, my previous job at, promoting economic development in Crestwood. We have a lot of land in the industrial park that could be developed. If somebody comes to the board or somebody comes to Crestwood and says they have some ideas to develop economically this area, I think we owe it to them to listen. Doesn't mean you have to guys have to act on it or do anything, but I think that's a good way to bring in and develop land that is vacant or land that has been condemned or land that has been that's not doing anything. So I think promoting economic development and bringing in jobs to inside the boundaries of the Crestwood School District is a way to help property values that just have land on it and no development on it, is a good way to bring in some good revenue into the school district. And there's always outside of the box ideas to include, not just to rely solely on raising property taxes on the district. Now, Crestwood still is the lowest millage rated district in the county. It has the best students in Northeast Pennsylvania and one of the lowest taxed in Northeast Pennsylvania. And it's no coincidence. So we do more with less than anybody else, and with the grant money, to balance our district and get our fund balance up and to continue to increase our financial capacity so that we can pay for the projects that are upcoming. And that is whatever the feasibility study comes back with. I know for a fact that our track needs to be expanded and replaced. We have trucks in our fleet that need to be replaced. We have some problems, other problems in other places that need to be addressed, and the feasibility study will probably talk more about that when it's presented to the public. But we just need to make sure that we address this financial capacity piece so that when we do all these things, that I can come to you and say we can afford whatever they're presenting to us. Whether it's a $5 million project or a $45 million project, I can say that we can afford it over the course of its lifetime. Remember that bond refinancing is better when you have one bond instead of 20. So as you can see what our last bond refinancing did, by just refinancing one bond, saved us a lot of money, especially next year and the year after that. So that's a good way to help move on and try to build our financial capacity up. So that's all I really have for you guys. Are there any questions? Yes, Barry.
I got a bunch.
Okay.
You said present fund balance of 1.3 million. Was that as of June 30th of last year?
Yeah, June 30th of 2020.
Okay, I know this is off the wall. Do you have any projection on what it would be this June?
Not necessarily, not really, not at this point yet, because I'm still trying to figure out how much we exactly saved. I know we saved about $175,000 from the furloughs that we just completed. We saved about $200,000 from the schools being shut down, from the energy savings, not only from the Siemens energy savings, but from the schools the power being shut off to the schools for most of the day. So there's going to be an increase to that number. I just don't know exactly how much. Maybe $300,000-$400,000 to that number, I would say.
Okay, now without, another, you said 300,000 or 400,000. Without the CARES money, right now, we would be looking at a deficit in the next school year of 3.2 million. With the CARES money, we're still looking at running at a deficit of 1.8 million, correct?
Correct.
And if we have as of last June, 1.3 million, and we're saving about 500,000. We're just, with the CARES money, next year's even, basically, with what we project, what we had last June, plus what we're saving this year. And with the CARES money, next year we should end with about at zero.
Right, we're treading,
At zero.
we're treading water, not counting yes or 3 money, yes.
And that's what
Yeah,
the
that's,
tax increase.
yeah, not for the tax increase, and there's some positive trends in the right direction there, it's just that, we have to continue to, and I'm being conservative, by the way, on what the money increase is, because the collection rate was higher last year than what the budgeted number was for local tax increase, or local tax revenue, because I downgraded our collection rate to 93%, but actually came in a little bit higher. So, I think the 2.5% tax increase that you guys enacted last year is probably gonna be the savior that's gonna keep us above the even number overall, because it did add that financial capacity that I talked about just now, because once you leave money on the table, it's almost impossible to get it back. That's one thing I didn't mention, which I should have mentioned. Once you leave money or percentage millage rates on the table, it's almost impossible to get it back unless you do, unless you completely, do like 7-8% or 5-6% raises every year to get it back. But even though you still leave it on the table because you didn't do it that year prior. But some of those numbers will have to be, so that 1.3 million might come in a little bit higher. That we might go up to $2 million fund balance, and we still might cover something. We still have a fund balance coming in, but the cash. When looking at the cash flows, it's a positive sign. It's not a negative sign. It's not like I'm running out of money now in May. Then like it was when I first got here. So
Just making sure I get my numbers right. Thank you.
yes, sir. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, Jonathan.
Hey, Peter, I just had a question coming from Tommy Benz on Facebook.
Yes,
I'm going
sir.
to read this off to you.
Okay.
Pete, I see from Emma's site that contains all the district's bond information that Cornell Ironworks is the 7th highest property taxpayer in the district. Their assessment as of 6/20 is $6 million, but media reports state that they completed a $14 million expansion project in December 2019. I assume that was too late to affect the property tax revenue in 2020 to 2021, but what is the assumption about this property in the 2021-2022 budget? By my math and using current millage rates, that should equate to about $150,000 of additional revenue for the district, parentheses, assuming media reports are accurate. Has the district looked into this? Thanks, and nice job tonight.
Well, thank you, Tommy, first on the last part, and then getting to your question. I'll have to check with our solicitor on that to find out what we have to do to get that that extra $14 million on our tax rolls, because that would be a reassessment piece that would have to be put onto onto the tax rolls. So I'll check with Attorney Dean on that to see what we have to do about that. But I know Attorney Dean is on that even quicker than I am on that stuff. So I will check with him tonight and tomorrow about that. But thank you very much for pointing that out. I appreciate it. Was there any questions from the Zoom attendees? Mr. Mahalik.
No questions so far from our panel.
Anything you'd like to add, Mr. Mahalik, to the discussion?
No, I think the only thing I want to mention is the next board meeting, the next budget meeting will be May 3rd. Not exactly sure of the location, but we will live stream regardless, whether we're in the auditorium or the cafeteria. We will continue to live stream all of our.
Oh, okay, yeah, I put or. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to put or on there. It should be and. We're going to live stream all of our meetings. So the next budget meeting will be on May 3rd. I don't know if it'll be in person or virtual, but it definitely will be live streamed no matter what. And then May 17th will be 6 p.m. At the same time and place. If you have any questions that you can't think of it now, my email address is there. This presentation will be on the district's website. If it's not already, I apologize for getting it up there late. Clearly, I had it set for last minute revisions and I forgot the and instead of the or, so I apologize for that. Is there any other comments or questions? No? Well, thank you guys for coming. Have a great night. Thank you.
So I guess that's why he was stopping my husband's.
How you doing, Mr. Costello?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Living the
Trying
dream.
to block him from LinkedIn.